Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices is made possible in part by Allstate and CIBC.
Good evening y bienvenidos to Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. I'm Michael Puente, reporter with WBEZ Chicago. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, one-on-one with Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia to talk about more Latino representation in government and police community tensions in his neighborhood of Little Village. The Illinois House backs a plan to remove toxic lead service lines in the state and wants Congress to pay for it. And what to expect as Homeland Security Task Force begins reuniting migrant parents and children separated under the Trump administration.
Your efforts help to create beautiful citizens of this world.
And as we prepare to celebrate mothers this weekend, La Última Palabra on the gifts of motherhood. First off tonight is that once in a decade time again, following U.S. Census numbers, Illinois will redraw its congressional district lines. With a Democratic governor and supermajorities in the state Senate and House, Democrats are in the driver's seat to redraw the state's political boundaries. Do Illinois Latinos now warrant more representation in Congress than they currently have? Joining us to discuss redistricting, census numbers, and more is Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia, a Democrat from the Little Village neighborhood. Thank you for joining us here today, Congressman.
Glad to join you, Michael.
Thank you. Congressman, how should the state of Illinois go about its redistricting process now that Illinois Democrats have the keys to the car? What kind of remapping would you like to see?
Well, I think that we're going to have one of the most open and inclusive redistricting processes ever in Illinois. I am heartened by the leadership that we have in Illinois with a president of the Senate and a new speaker of the House who have committed to having real community engagement, hearings, and to hear from people what constitute communities of interest and recognizing the diversity of the populations in Illinois, especially across northern Illinois.
Congressman, let me ask you this. Do you think there should now be 2 majority Latino districts in Illinois?
That's a little harder to say yet. There has been growth. I know that people have been looking at the possibilities of creating a southwest and a northwest side district, one much more suburban on the northwest side. But I think that we need to see some firmer numbers before making a decision on whether that's doable or not in this census cycle. I remain open to the possibility, but certainly had it not been for the growth of the Latino community, Illinois might have lost another district.
Well, Congressman, according to recent U.S. Census, Illinois will lose 1 seat in the House. This follows a continuing trend of out-migration from Illinois. What effect will this trend have, and how do you think it can be reversed?
Well, in the first place, I think we had a loss of population in Illinois due to the lack of new migration into the country. As you know, migration from Mexico, for example, which historically has contributed to the growth of population in Illinois, is at an almost all-time low. And 2, I think that our lack of investment in the field of education, especially higher education, and under-resourcing of our public school system also caused other people to leave the state looking for greater opportunities. So that's a lesson for policymakers in the coming next 10 years. We need to invest, we need better outcomes, and we need to come out of the pandemic really building the potential of Illinois.
Well, Congressman, let me ask you this. Do you think the census undercounted this country's Latino population?
Well, no census has been perfect, and we know that the Latino population has been undercounted in prior censuses. I think the efforts of the Donald Trump administration at including a citizenship question on the questionnaire was harmful and probably caused people not to participate in the census. He also sought to exclude the undocumented. So these are unprecedented postures by a president and by federal administrations. So without a doubt, that had a chilling effect in the count across the country. In Illinois, it probably didn't have as much of an impact, in part because of the community's involvement in getting the word out about the importance of the census, and then ensuring that there were additional investments made to instill confidence in people that the information they were provided would be held private and confidential. If that had not occurred, we would have seen a larger undercount or non-participation of people, as we saw happen in states like Arizona, where the state didn't invest, where other efforts did not take place. So all told, I think we can be fairly proud of the work that we did in Illinois to prevent a further undercount.
Moving on a little bit, Congressman, the city has been roiled in tension following recent fatal police shootings like 13-year-old Adam Toledo in Little Village, your neighborhood here in Chicago. What's your reaction to the videos released showing Toledo's death, as well as Anthony Alvarez, who was also killed by police in March? What actions would you like to see taken in the way of police community relations and specific Chicago Police Department policies?
The two videos were shocking to me, and they occurred in my congressional district, one in the very neighborhood where I've lived for 53 years, the other on the northwest side. I think that this is a wake-up call. This is a call to action for change and reform to happen in the Chicago City Council, for the police department to enact changes to its pursue policies, and also on the federal front for passage of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, as well as a reversal of the Department of Justice's position with respect to consent decrees. The implementation of the consent decree in Chicago is critical to reinstill trust, to reinstill the idea of accountability in policing in our system here in Chicago. I think without a doubt, it will usher in many changes as it relates to community safety and policing.
Our thanks to Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia.
Thank you.
There are an estimated 700,000 lead service lines carrying water to homes in Illinois, more than half of which are in Chicago. Lead in drinking water can cause brain damage in children, among a slew of other health problems. Last year, the city announced a plan to slowly replace those lines, but it is yet to get underway. Now, state lawmakers want to tackle the toxic problem, and as Chicago Tonight's Nick Bloomberg reports, they want Congress to foot the bill.
For the last 14 years, Maria del Carmen Macias has offered daycare out of her Belmont Cragen home. A couple years back, the Department of Children and Family Services notified Macias that to keep her license in good standing, she'd have to test the water in her home for lead.
This one needed 2 tests. If I have the fridge that makes ice, I need to send them a big one with ice, and the bathroom, twice.
Macias says her building's lead levels came back normal, but she was frustrated the state didn't offer enough guidance on how to test her home's water or what to do if the lead levels were too high.
There is no guidance and no clarity, and providers are, just scrambling for information.
Macias credits the nonprofit Elevate Energy for offering her training and financial support, and she's been helping other child care providers get educated and take action. But she thinks house-by-house lead mitigation isn't enough to tackle such a huge problem.
It should not be on the shoulders of the providers. It should be the state. Even if I don't have a daycare, what if I have a lot of lead in my pipes? It is affecting me, it is affecting my family, it's affecting my children.
State lawmakers agree. Last month, the Illinois House okayed a bill that calls on utilities to find and replace lead service lines carrying water to customers' homes. Depending on how many pipes the utility has to replace, they'd have between 15 and 34 years to get it done.
Everyone should be able to drink clean water without any issue.
The bill originally set aside $200 million from a new fee to help pay for replacement, but that was removed to secure enough votes. Instead, supporters are looking to the Biden administration's infrastructure plan to fund the money, which left some Republicans skeptical.
I would like to see this bill be allowed to go forward with an idea of how it's going to be paid for, because it is going to have to be paid for.
Biden's infrastructure plan includes $45 billion to replace lead service lines nationwide. Justin Williams of the Metropolitan Planning Council says the state needs to be ready to act as soon as any money is available.
Illinois and Chicago have more lead service lines than any other state or city in the country. So it's a pretty substantial problem at both the city and state scale.
Williams says funding from Congress would make a big dent in the problem, and he wants government at every level to come up with a plan.
The state of Illinois is likely going to have a long-term role to play in finding dedicated funding to deal with this problem. And then finally, municipalities and water utilities are also going to need to identify sustainable and equitable revenue sources to address lead service lines in their community.
Williams hopes the lead service line replacement bill will pass the state Senate. Macias is hopeful too. She says it's a critical issue, especially for people of color and people who don't make much money.
To have clean water is not a luxury, it's a human right.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
The bill making its way through the General Assembly would create an advisory panel to help identify funding if federal money doesn't come through, and require utilities to come up with a plan by 2027 to replace service lines. In addition to the money in the Biden administration's plan, a bill setting aside $35 billion in funding for clean drinking water infrastructure passed the Senate late last month. Up next, a look at efforts to reunite migrant parents and their children. Stay with us. This week, 4 families separated under former President Donald Trump's immigration policy were the first to be reunited by organizations working with the Biden administration's Family Reunification Task Force. It's just the beginning of an effort to reunite more than 1,000 families separated from their children since 2017. And the service organizations who inherited sparse or incomplete information from the Trump administration for these migrant children say it's a daunting task. Joining us to talk about what that effort entails are David Sinsky, Executive Director of Heartland Human Care Services, which operates 5 shelters for migrant children across the Chicago area, Vanessa Pineda, Deputy Program Director for the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights in their Phoenix, Arizona office, and Oscar Chacon, Executive Director of Alianza Americas, a nonprofit network of immigrant-serving organizations. Welcome. Vanessa, can you tell us how would you go about finding families and sponsors for unaccompanied children when you did this work during the Trump administration?
Yes, so it's such a daunting task, right? In 2017, 2018, with the zero tolerance policy, I was inundated with referrals for children that were coming through facilities where they had no information with them, what the adults had transferred them to the government shelters. And so I was tasked with trying to figure out where the parents were, whether they were in country of origin, whether they were detained, and then figuring out how to talk to them and finding out what it is that they wanted for their children to return back home, to stay in the U.S., and what those options look like.
And David, can you explain how these children are passed into your care and what happens from there?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. So Heartland Alliance has a long history of working with refugee resettlement and immigrants, providing an array of services, including legal support, torture treatment, trauma recovery, and helping immigrants find safety and stability here, including unaccompanied children that cross the border alone without parents. And we have over 20 years of history doing this shelter work specifically through a child welfare setting, so that kids who are presenting at the border have only are limited to 72 hours or mandated to only be in immigration control for 72 hours, and then have to be transferred to a shelter that's run by the Department of Health and Human Services, so that the best interests of the children's and their welfare is the foremost priority. And so once children arrive to us, our goal is to first ensure that they're feeling safe and stable in the environment, their immediate needs are met, food, clothing, shower, acclimation to the shelter environment. And then we have a whole team of social workers, doctors, case managers that work on connecting and reuniting them with their family or sponsor here in the U.S. And the goal is that while their stay with us is short term, and that while they're with us, they've been through so much, we just want them to be kids again.
Sure.
We do all the work behind the scenes to connect them with family.
Sure. Oscar, what are you hearing from people in the countries of origin for these immigrants, as well as asylum-seeking children, about their parents, about the beginnings of a family reunification?
People are hopeful that there may be a new day with the Biden administration. People are also hoping that it doesn't go too slow. As you mentioned at the beginning, more than 1,000 cases of this nature are in place. At a very initial, step. And the hope is that people will be able to see their kids reunited, with them, with their families, and that a form of justice be brought about, in different shapes, because it's not a situation where one size fits all. And so we need to be very open-minded to solutions that are going to be diverse, depending, the characteristics of the specific situation.
Vanessa, for the children you work with, what was their mental health like?
It's such a difficult question. I mean, it was what you would expect. It was terrifying, right? I typically worked with unaccompanied minors that were teenagers who were already traumatized from the journey, from their lives in their country of origin. And then we're just compounding trauma when we added this separation. There were children who were verbal when they were back with their parents, and then after the separation, they were no longer speaking, children having panic attacks, children crying at the sound or if they had video calls with their parents at the sight of their parents' photo. So the trauma continues, and it's going to be with them for the rest of their lives, for them and their parents. I was on phone calls as well with parents that had regretted the decision because they now were thinking they had lost their children, and some have for a very long period of time at this point. So it's
yeah. Well, David, continuing with that, how do you deal with trauma in the kids in your care?
So we recognize that Vanessa said that children are leaving really traumatic situations. Just to imagine a family making the decision to send their kids here, fleeing violence, extreme poverty, stuff that we can't even imagine in terms of the level of violence that takes place. And so their journey is also traumatic. And so we make sure that our staff, the team of social workers and others, are trauma informed and trauma trained. But because the kids are with us for a very short period of time, perhaps no more than 2 weeks, we're careful to open up any situation, any emotional experience that we can't help close before they're into a longer term placement. So to that end, we, as I said, create an environment where they can just be kids, just kind of relax, feel safe. And then, but in their placement with family, we make sure that we link them with resources that can serve the more long-term mental health needs.
Sure. Oscar, does the U.S. bear responsibility for reparations in these family separations? And if so, what should they be providing?
Well, in my opinion, yes. When government take actions that result in harming people in many instances, perhaps irreparably, because of the damage done to kids hardly can be recovered, I believe we need to take action and take responsibility for what we did with our taxpayers' money. I believe the one way in which this can be done is by allowing the parents of these kids to be able to reconnect with their children, by providing them adequate humanitarian visas to be able to settle in the US, support them in that process as well. And in some instances, recognize that actually reuniting families may not necessarily be the solution that is best, given the fact that in many instances, children have been separated for a long time. There are, for all practical purposes, adopted parents. But the question is, how do you really strike, some level of fairness in this situation? And as I said before, not one size fits all, but we need to be open, to be creative in terms of delivering justice to these families and children.
Vanessa, what other actions would you like to see from the Biden administration to help these children and their families?
Yeah, and I think Oscar hit the nail on the head, right? It is a case by case, what each child and each family will need. But I mean, in the grand scheme of where we're looking at solutions, legal status is one of them, finding ways for that immigration process that we already have in our pockets to use, not be as traumatizing to these families. Every time someone has to show up to immigration court, that causes anxiety and fear and additional trauma. So if we can get rid of some of those traditional immigration roadblocks or processes, then that's huge in helping the family move forward. Again, and then also looking at the mental health piece. So I think legal and mental health have to go hand in hand because they sort of cross into each other's paths. And so then finding mental health resources for the families as a family unit, for the individuals, parents and the children. And then in the long term, just making sure this never happens again. We can't, as a society, continue to ever see this, happen in our government again. And so finding ways with administration changes that family separation never happen.
Well, our thanks to David Sinsky, Vanessa Pineda, and Oscar Chacon.
Thank you.
Back with more Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, right after this. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken a toll on everyone, but one group in particular has had an especially heavy lift: mothers, who studies say have taken on the majority of caregiving responsibilities over the last year. That means those of us lucky enough to celebrate mothers tomorrow have even more reason to thank them for all they do. Tonight, local mom and author Letty Belmares gives a La Última Palabra on what she sees as the value of mothers to society.
When I first discovered the importance and impact that a mother's presence has in a child's development was during the time that I was working as a teacher for the public school system. It was then when I decided that when I become a mom, I would raise my children as much as I can. I couldn't imagine at the time that I would get to homeschool my children, work alongside my husband, and now create children's books together as a family. The rewards have truly been humbling. It has been my experience through motherhood that I have learned to become the woman that I hoped and quite frankly didn't even dream I could become. My children have given me the opportunities that I wanted and needed to grow in every form possible that a person can grow. They have been my little blessings. The vocation of a mother and the level of raising that she provides to her children is a decision that comes from a place of giving. A mother gives so much. They give their time, their efforts, their patience, love, life, and soul, willingly and unselfishly. Many a times sacrificing her career, financial status, and even social status. But they understand very well what they're exchanging. We understand that it is something greater. It is something more valuable than anything that can be found in a store. And to the stay-at-home moms, you are home managers. Continue to guide your children well, with love and firmness, because your efforts help to create beautiful citizens of this world. And that in turn, you are directly helping to make this world a better place. How about that?
And you can catch more in our La Última Palabra series on our website. And happy Mother's Day tomorrow. And that's our show for this Saturday night. Join Brandis Friedman tomorrow night for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. And you can catch my reporting on 91.5 FM WBEZ. Next week on Latino Voices, WTTW's Phil Ponce will be here in the host chair. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, I'm Michael Puente. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy, stay safe. Buenas noches.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, serving Chicago as a personal injury law firm since 1984.